and welcome to this week's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. My name is Ian Fisher, and we are recording this on June 22nd, though you won't be hearing it or seeing it until July 9th. And honestly, I can't even imagine what the world will look like in 2 weeks between when this podcast records and when it airs, but it also feels like April was just yesterday, so who knows? We're living a lifetime of experiences each and every week, and I know that you all probably feel the same. Now that summer has arrived, I would like to encourage you all to take a breath. Press pause on the things that have been challenging you through this process and look for opportunities to recharge and redirect your curiosity. Applying to college is tough and overwhelming, and it was never finished by anyone in just 1 week in July. Take it one day at a time, and we'll help you one piece at a time as you move through these next few months. All right, now, because summer is a time for reflection, we wanted today's episode of the show to have a little bit of that summer flavor right off the bat. Joining me for our first segment is one of my most favorite frenemies in the whole world, my colleague out in Rochester, New York, Abigail Anderson. Hey, Abigail, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ian. Thanks so much for having me. It's nice to be here.
I'm glad that you're here. So I want to start at the beginning, right? We're talking a little bit about reflection. When you went through the college application process, so put yourself back in that position, how would you grade your approach to the process? How would you think about the way that you engage with it, especially given now that you're someone that works with students all the time in helping them apply to college?
That's a good question. In all honesty, I'd probably give myself, without grade inflation, like a B or a B minus.
A solid
maybe
B-ster.
even lower. And I'm saying this as somebody who was, I had a 3.8 in college. I was a very good student, but I don't think I did a great, really reflective job with my college application process.
Gotcha. So it was something where you were sort of in a position where you didn't quite know exactly how to approach it maybe, and you were feeling around trying to do it in the right kind of way?
Totally. I was very, I don't think I recognized it at the time, but I was very overwhelmed by the process, and I was very scared of the idea of not knowing where I was going to be in a year. It was the first time in my life that I didn't have a plan for the following year. And I think I was very, very scared of that. Mm-hmm. I don't think I knew it at the time. And because I have 3 older brothers who had been through the college application process, and I very much went through the college application process with them, going on all of their college tours as the annoying little sister.
Right.
I think I kind of just skated through my own process, following in their footsteps.
I see. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm not going to ask you about your essay writing, and I'm not going to take you and ask you what were the mistakes that you made on your activities list. We'll save that for another time. But I want to focus in especially on the process of looking for the right schools for you, and especially defining what the right schools would be, right? I think that's an early part of this, is sort of figuring out, what am I really looking for? So you went and visited colleges with your brothers. You got to see some examples of different kinds of institutions. As you were getting up into your senior year, what were some of the things that you were looking for out of your ideal match?
Yeah, so I grew up in a really small college town. I grew up in Williamstown, Massachusetts, right near Williams College. And my older brothers, 2 went to Dartmouth and 1 went to Colby. So those 3 institutions are all pretty similar. And I was very familiar with kind of a small liberal arts college in New England.
Right.
And so when I started my process, I thought I was going to want to do something different than that. And I looked at a lot of schools in what a New Englander would consider the South. I don't think a Southerner would consider the South, in Virginia and North Carolina. And I quickly realized that that was not for me. And so I narrowed my search back into similar kinds of institutions in New England.
Okay. So when you say similar kinds of institutions, you're looking at a lot of the traditional, smaller liberal arts colleges.
Yep.
how did you differentiate between some of those options? What were the things that you were looking for to help understand how the flavor of a Colby is different from a Dartmouth or different from an Amherst or a Williams, et cetera?
And this is where I would give myself a poor grade with the
Okay.
application process. I did not do that up front. I built out my list with the help of a very wonderful college counselor. I went to a great boarding school. We had a
Mm-hmm.
really phenomenal college counseling system. So I built out my list of 9 or 10 schools with her. And it was
Mm-hmm.
a really, looking back, it was actually a really well-balanced list. And it's a list that made a lot of sense. But I didn't really understand any of the differences between the schools that I applied to. So Bucknell versus Colby or Colgate versus Bates. I didn't see differences until I was admitted and actually went back for revisits. And it was really in my revisit experience that this thing became tangible and I could imagine myself on those campuses, and where I started to really think about what was important to me, what I valued in my high school experience, and also what I wanted to do differently in college. And so it really wasn't until April of my senior year of high school that I dug into that self-reflection piece.
And that's really interesting. And I want to come back to that because I think that's where we should focus. But I'm curious about this idea. The way that you describe the process of building your list puts an awful lot of power, responsibility, however you want to think about it, in the hands of your counselor.
Yes.
Right? Who had to be in a position to say, I think you should look at these schools, or given that you like these institutions, let's add these other ones to the list. Were you just sort of comfortable sitting back and saying, hey, if you think that these are good options, I'm good with that? What was your thought process, if you can recall, in terms of thinking about those options and your relationship with your counselor, especially?
Yes, that's a good question. I had a good relationship with my counselor. Again, as I said, it was boarding school. I'd known her for 4 years. She knew my parents quite well. My parents came in for a couple of meetings with her. I was able to be very open and honest with her. But quite frankly, I think I was so scared of the process that I wanted almost like a scapegoat. Like if I wasn't going to be happy, I could turn around and say, well, my college counselor didn't do the best job. Fortunately for me, I think it really worked out, but I hope that when I'm working with students now in the counseling position, I hope I'm not put in that position. Because
right. It turns out that's why they're not doing their research, Abigail. They're looking to blame you eventually. No, but I do think that there is something to that. I think whatever the reasons may be, I do think that students are reluctant to jump in with both feet to really look at college options. I think that could be connected to concern about not knowing what the plan is. It could be a concern about sort of giving yourself over to the process, right? Falling in love with a school that ultimately might choose not to accept you can be a really disappointing outcome. It's hard to know how to look for a college in the right kind of way. I think the process of doing research becomes really challenging. And so it makes sense, I think, for a lot of students to sort of, all right, I've got my list, I'm going to apply. And then in April, then I'll look and figure out what the right fit for me is going to be.
Well, Ian, something you said really just brought up a memory for me, which was I had a clear number one choice. I wanted to go to Dartmouth. And I think my list fell into place knowing that that was a reach school. And I applied to similar culturally institutions to Dartmouth, values, learning style. But I think I quite frankly thought I was going to get into Dartmouth. And when I didn't, I was gutted.
Yeah.
Had a lacrosse game that day and played pretty aggressively, was very, very upset. And at that point realized, oh my gosh, I actually have to figure out what I like in a college.
Yeah.
And fortunately, as I said, my college counselor helped me build out a really good list and I had good choices.
And so in some ways you lucked into it. You were disappointed.
Absolutely.
But when you got to April, you were in a position where you still had some control over the final decision. You still had an opportunity to decide where you wanted to go. And so how many schools were sort of down to your final list of possibilities in April of your senior year?
I was admitted to all but one school.
Oh,
So
okay, great. So it really was a good list.
it
The
really
part that
was
you
a good list.
contributed was the
Yeah.
problem, and your
Yes.
counselor was right. Okay,
Yep,
great.
absolutely.
Okay,
But ultimately, I picked between three schools. There were
okay,
three schools I was really serious about and revisited and met with friends who went there and did like a much better research process on during that last month or few weeks.
okay. So you hadn't really developed any strong criteria for what you were looking for when you applied.
Mm-hmm.
What became the criteria that you were using to look at these three final institutions? And do you want to tell us? I mean, I know that the other two are going to feel really sad that they don't get to count you among their alumni, but do you want to share what the three were that you were looking at?
Yeah. So
Great.
I actually think, interestingly, I ended up picking between very similar institutions. And one thing that I say to students, and I firmly believe, is that I could have been successful at any of these three institutions. So I picked between Colgate, Bates, and Colby. So most people can say, I don't even know the difference between Bates and Colby. And sometimes I feel that way, even as somebody who graduated from Colby and spent 4 years there. But ultimately, after revisiting those campuses, I realized some things that were really important to me were not having Greek life. So Colgate got ruled out. And then one thing that I really wanted to grow into in college that I didn't have an experience to do in high school was to become more adventurous and I would say like outdoorsy.
Okay.
So I wanted to do a lot more skiing and hiking, and I knew I loved being outdoors. My brother had just finished hiking the Appalachian Trail, and I was really intrigued by that experience. And Colby kind of fit that bill much better than Bates, and just in terms of its position in the state of Maine and campus location in the city of Waterville, et
Yeah.
cetera.
And I think you sort of had described that it wasn't just about being more adventurous and outdoorsy around campus, but also an opportunity to be more adventurous in terms of exploring beyond the borders of your country, right? So
yes, and
tell us about that.
that was a huge piece. So as I looked at these three schools, I realized, wow, I've spent 4 years on a boarding school campus. These schools aren't that much bigger. Their physical campuses aren't that much different.
Mm-hmm.
I think I could get a little bit stifled being at another smaller institution for 4 years.
Right.
So in really good conversation with my parents, who were great guides in the process, they really helped me think about how important it would be for me to have the opportunity to study abroad. And I kind of kicked it up a notch. I know most people say, oh, I want to study abroad for a semester. I created this criteria of wanting to study abroad for an entire year.
Mm-hmm.
And Colby was the one school of the three that kind of said, oh, yeah, absolutely. We let students do that. That's great that you're excited about that. And so I did. I studied abroad for a year, my entire junior year, while I was at Colby, through
I just don't,
support
I
of a
mean,
professor.
that seems ludicrous to me to spend a full quarter of your college experience not at the college that you've chosen,
Yeah.
it's a choice. It's definitely a choice. So you went to the London School of Economics?
I did, yes.
And what was that like? Did it feel like it was a complementary part of the experience that you were having at Colby, or did it feel like it was a totally different and separate experience that it ultimately didn't merge with what your Colby experience was?
So culturally, it was a completely different experience. Like London, England versus Waterville, Maine probably couldn't be any more different. But academically, it was this beautiful blend for me. I studied sociology for an entire year. I took 4 amazing year-long sociology courses. Many people don't know the London School of Economics is the London School of Economics and Political Science, and they have this phenomenal world-renowned sociology program. And it actually led me to deciding I wanted to write a thesis my senior year, and it helped me discover this interest that I had in the sociology of health and medicine, because Great Britain handles healthcare so vastly differently than
Right.
America. So it really was a blend.
So one of the main reasons that you ultimately chose the school you chose became a defining feature of your college experience. And, I think that it sometimes works out that way. You're
Mhm.
looking for a particular kind of school for a particular reason, and you seize that opportunity when you get there. Sometimes you are surprised by the things that you really end up loving about a school, things that you had never even thought of, things that had never occurred to you. And sometimes the things that you thought were going to be great end up being things that you don't pursue at all. Are there, sort of as we're coming to the end of this segment, are there some things that you can think of that surprised you about Colby that became a really terrific sort of element of your experience there, maybe against expectations that you might have had going in?
I had no expectations about what my academic experience was going to be like at Colby. In fact, it was kind of a likely school, not a likely, it was probably a just right school for me. And so
Okay.
I thought I was going to go in and feel like the smartest kid in the room. And that wasn't always the case at all. And I had a phenomenal academic experience. But it also was the case that I developed really strong relationships with professors in my first semester at Colby. And it was a relationship in that first semester with an intro to sociology professor who then led me to major in sociology, who then recommended me for the general course, the study abroad program at LSE, which then led me to my thesis, which
Hmm.
then led me to graduate Phi Beta Kappa. I mean, I had no idea how incredibly academic and rewarding academically Colby was going to be for me.
Did you have any idea how academic you were? Did it surprise you that
No,
you followed through with
yeah.
these interests in this kind of way?
I think that's interesting. I had always been told I was really smart, and that I had an interesting mind, but I never really felt that
Hmm.
way in high school. I think it was because I wasn't studying what I was meant to study. I was studying
Right.
general high school coursework. And so college was really kind of an unfolding of discovering a field I was really passionate about.
That's great.
Yeah.
And I think it sort of reinforces one of these ideas that we share with some of our students, that you really grow into a particular kind of person by virtue of the school you've chosen and the opportunities that you take advantage of, especially when you're there.
Yep.
And so there is a Dartmouth version of Abigail out there. She won't be friends with me, so I don't like her. But the Colby version has turned out really fantastic, right? So I think it's great. I would love to do more of these with more of our colleagues to learn a little bit more about how they went through this process and chose the school that they chose. Um, I guess we're out of
I would
time.
too.
Yeah, wouldn't that be
Yeah.
fun?
Yeah.
Well, let's try and do that. Meanwhile, thank you very much for coming on the show today and letting me ask you these questions and helping me learn a little bit more about you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. This
You
was a
got it.
lot
You're
of fun.
welcome. You're welcome back anytime. All
Awesome.
right. When we come back from the break, we are going to be talking about COVID essays. So don't go away.